Good morning, developers. How are you? I hope you had an amazing 2 days at this conference so far. And when I look at the timetable, at the schedule, I think that the Friday will top those 2 days. I'm actually amazed that people showed up here despite the title, because who wants to hear about a 200-year-old company? So yeah, maybe, although that I can show you something new or something you didn't know already. So my goal of this presentation is, in fact, that at the end of the talk, there are more than 50% of you here still, and that less than 25% fell asleep. So if we manage to do that, I think I'm fine for today. So I'm working for Unix, and I think I have my mouse cursor here. That doesn't do anything good. Which you might not know, and I think nobody knows at the moment who they are and what we do. But maybe some of you know the Austrian state printing house. And Unix, the company that I'm working for, is a spin-off of the Austrian state printing house. To see how we changed and how the Austrian state printing house managed to go forward, we have to go back 200 years and do a little bit of time traveling. So imagine 200 years ago, if you wanted to go out of your city or you wanted to come back to your city, you needed something that's called a traveler's permit, so that you won't be stopped by security. And that is what we did at the time, because we were responsible for the identity for people to travel. And we most probably did it on machines that looked something like that. I haven't been there personally, but I'd like to think about that. So over the years, traveling got more and more popular and more people traveled. So the thing with the traveling permits, it worked at the time, but it wasn't that good anymore. So we needed a more standardized way to travel. So the passport was invented. And of course, we printed that. And we still print the Austrian passport and passport for a lot of other countries. And we do that on machines that look like that. Still not that modern. But also identity changed over time. And nowadays, we do stuff like that on machines that look a little bit better and more modern. But we did not stop here. We think, okay, where is the identity going next? And everything, of course, is going digital. So we are also going into the digital world. And therefore, our workplaces look more like that at the moment. So if I have to guess, I'd say more than half of the people we hired in the last year were actually developers or software testers or those DevOps people there. But how would you imagine a 200-year-old company doing software development? Of course, like many of us, we started with a software development model that looked something like that. You all know the waterfall model, but you also know, okay, there are some problems with this model. This doesn't work really good, so you're not adapting to any change. So if your customer wants to change anything, he has to go back to the specification. You do not have any feedback from the stages downstream. So you do a lot of specification at the beginning, you do implementation in the middle, and in the end, when time is already of the essence, and most projects are over time and over budget already, you start testing your software, and you find out, okay, the thing we built in the middle is crap. Okay, so we try to do something different. And I don't want to go into detail here, because many of you know this methodology, and I think most of you will know it better than I do. We started to use Scrum. Okay, Scrum is an iterative agile model which which is built upon sprints. Those sprints can be like a week or 2 weeks or a month, whatever, but they have always the same length. and you start with a fixed sprint backlog. So at the beginning of each sprint, you sit together, you say, okay, this is the stuff that we want to do in the next 2 weeks. And at the end, you have a nice sprint review where you show off everything you've done in 2 weeks. And if things go well, you have an increment at the end of the 2 weeks, which you can possibly ship to your customer. That really sounds very well. That sounds very adaptive. You can try to do every 2 weeks. You can adapt to the things that your customer wants to have now. Okay. So yeah, there are still problems, and I don't say that it's the fault of Scrum itself that there are problems. It just didn't work that well for us. So one of the problems were that all of those sprints started to be like 2-week mini waterfall projects. We did a lot of specification in the first days, then we did a lot of implementation, and if we were lucky, we did a little bit of testing in the end. Because, like all those waterfall projects, at the time we were finished with the features we wanted to do at the beginning, there was not a lot of time for testing anymore. So those sprint lengths are really arbitrary. Because you think at the beginning, oh, that is stuff I want to do, and most of the time something happens that you can't finish this in 2 weeks. And operations is not calculated for in any way. So the problem is, for example, okay, you want to do all those cool stuff at the beginning, you want to implement all those features, and on the second day in the sprint, you have a production outage. You need all your developers for 2 days to fix this. So all those nice stuff you wanted to do at the beginning of the sprint has gone. And this is where this took us. And many of you would say, okay, Kanban, that's not really a software development methodology. No, it isn't. But it is a set of rules that you can follow, and you can build a really nice software development methodology onto it. So what we did, we took the stuff from Scrum that was working for us. So all those daily stand-ups and all those plannings, the sprint backlog refinement, we still do this. But we do not do those 2 weeks sprints because it just didn't work for us. And what's the good thing for it, you can build operations directly into your software development model. So where did this came from? Of course, you may have already guessed it. It's a DevOps. And we all know DevOps is not something you just follow. DevOps is a culture. So to implement DevOps, you cannot just say, okay, we do these 3 things and we're done. You have to change how your organization works. And you have to break up those silos that we built over years. And trust me, in the 200-year-old companies, there are more silos than people working for the company. So we have the sales silo, the development silo, the operations silo, and we have some executives doing something, whatever, we don't know. And at first, we tried to break up the silo between the development and operations. Because if we look at the waterfall model, you have, at the end of all this implementation and a little bit of testing, you throw a software that is maybe working to your development, to your operations guy and say, hey, now run this in a production system. And they say, what? Who are you? So we managed to do this all in one team. And we even have some of our salespeople nowadays in our team integrated. Maybe we get those executives there, we don't know. But the basis of DevOps is, in fact, the 3 ways. And the first way is you have to implement a system thinking. You cannot just think about the stuff you're responsible for. So if you're a developer, you cannot just think about development. You have to think about the whole system. You have to think about operations. You have to think about how is anyone going to sell this stuff to a customer. And if you manage this, you can go forward to the second way, fast feedback. You have everything you do, everything you change in your organization, you have to watch out to get fast feedback for every change you do there, so that you can adapt quickly. And that is the third way. You have to live by a continuous improvement. You have to live by the standard that you always want to get better at what you're doing. So, how does security fit into all that? Do we even need security anymore with DevOps? I heard, okay, no, with DevOps you don't need security. Okay, strange thing. If you look at this picture, and these are the biggest data breaches we had in the last years in the 21st century. And what have all those in common? It's that millions and sometimes even billions of personal data sets got stolen by criminals. And this alone would be the reason to have security in it. But with a general data protection regulation coming up next week, there are also very high penalties on data breaches for the companies that did not secure their software or their operations. So, in my opinion, we even need more security. But there's a problem. So, in many companies it looks like that. It looks like that in our company, of course. We have on 100 developers, you have 10 operations people, and on every 10 operations people, you have one security guy. So you don't have to be a math expert to see, oh, there's a problem. How should this one security guy secure all the stuff that this 110 other people are doing? No way for that. So what happened? Of course, we had our security team, and because, like John already said in the moderation, we live for security and data protection, and this is our core business. We have a very good security team. And what did they do? They did pen testing, white box testing, black box testing on our software on a regular basis. And what are they doing? They're coming up with like 100 pages, hopefully a little bit less, of PDF with security bugs. And they gave them to the developers. And from the outside, you would think, okay, if you do this, the developers go something like this. But if you look closer, and if you're a developer, it might also look something like that. So that's not working. What did we do? So we did, in fact, the same thing we did with the operations guy. We put him on the team, on the development team, and we made the developers responsible for the security in the software. And the security got another role. They did not do those pen testing, and they did not do those white box testing and whatever. They gave clear goals. So what do we want to achieve as the security for our product? And they made the developers responsible for doing that, and they helped them. So I think that is the most important thing. You cannot be the security guy that always says no to everything and always say, oh, you're doing that wrong, you need to do that, you need to do something else. The most important thing about the security team is they help the developers to achieve the security goals. Like the operations team helped the developers to achieve the operations goals. And of course, there's a name for that. It's called DevSecOps, and there is, and I know there are a lot of other names for that, like SecDevOps, DevOpsSec, AppSec, and Rugged DevOps. But in fact, they are talking all about the same thing. And that is automate the shit out of security. So this one guy, for the 100 developers and the 10 operations guy, cannot do all the security for them. But he can build software that helps them, and he can build stuff into the development lifecycle. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about and how I think this could work. You all heard of the Equifax breach, I think. It was a breach in March last year, 2017, where over 140 million personal data sets got stolen. And this was all because of a vulnerability in one of their dependencies they used. In this case, it was a Java framework, the Apache Struts. I think you'll know that. And what is amazing me every time when I see this slide is, okay, we had in March 2017 a vulnerability in the Struts framework, and it was discovered and it was fixed in March 2017. Only 3 days later, and I have to admit this is really not a large time frame the security team was working on here. The breach of Equifax happened. And it was discovered in August. And after that, it was dragged through media and was very popular. And what we see here in this slide is, although everyone knew about this vulnerability and everyone knew about this breach, the downloads for the vulnerable version of Struts were not affected anyhow. People still were using the old version. They did not update. They did not do anything. So if I have to guess, there are a lot of Java applications still using this vulnerable version, and they could be just broken like Equifax was. And this is where DevOps comes in again, because if you remember the first way, and this is something that Gene Kim, the author of the Phoenix project and the DevOps handbook, said, you have to emphasize performance of the entire system and never pass a defect downstream. So let's think about that. If you already have defects in your dependencies, how can the software you build on that be any better than the dependencies you use? And I told you to automate this. There are a lot of tools that can help here. So you can use those open source tools like the OWASP dependency check, or you can use commercial tools if you like to pay money for stuff. And big companies really like to pay money for stuff. So you can also use the Sonatype Nexus Pro, or you can use the JFrog X-Ray. They all do that for you. And one of the most important things is you have to integrate this in your pipeline, in your build pipeline. So you cannot do this and, do security testing once a week or once a month or once a year or something like that. You have to do the security testing and all the security testing with every commit in your development pipeline. This is the only way that works. You have to visualize it. So people are very visual thinking animals. And you have to show, you have to make public what is going well and what is not going well. And in the end, you have to break the build. So when we started to do this, we had those nice dashboards. We showed the developers what was going wrong and where some errors were and where the security problems were. And the developers were, that's nice. Okay, I'll do something else. When you want to, and I have to say it like this, when you want to hurt your developer, you have to break their build. So that is the only thing they care about. So you heard a lot about what we are doing. And you see, we've come this long way from the printing of the traveling permits with all these letterpresses you saw at the beginning to doing software development. Now, I don't think we came such a long way as the IBM guy told us on Wednesday, where they were a meat company or something like that. We always had identity in the core of our business. But what did we do to become a software development company? How to change something in your company? How to get something done? So I wrote a few keywords, a few bullet points together, and maybe if you think, the stuff that he told us today, there is something maybe I can do. Yeah, maybe you can take something of that and change something in your company on Monday or Tuesday. It depends if you have holiday on Monday. You have to get management on board. And if you're talking about change, or if something talks about change, that is always the first thing you hear. You have to get management on board. But I think the more important stuff is the change itself has to come from the bottom up. You cannot change anything top down. People and developers, they need to want to change. They need to want to do this. Else you do not have any chance to get anything done. Very important is take small steps. Do not try to change everything at once. It won't work. You have to do small changes. You have to see, do they work? And then do another change. And don't be afraid to fail. I think many of the stuff we tried the last years, and most probably much of the things we do at the moment, they don't work. But don't be afraid of that. Just see, okay, that didn't work, we do something else now. And revisit the changes. So I hope I was able to give you a little bit of an idea of what we were doing and how we managed to become a software development company over the years. And maybe you can take something with you. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks. Very good. We have a couple of questions here. I was sitting there the whole time thinking, yeah, but how do you actually do it? I mean, in this company, it's 200 years old, and you've pulled out a new division which just works on development. But here, the question here, how did you manage to break those silos in such a near government? You have to explain, the Staatsdruckerei in Austria is a private company, but sure, it's very, very official. So how do you convince the people up top that, so they don't say, ah, yes, but I have a friend from university back then who tells me something else?
We were just lucky. So the thing, yeah, that's the only thing. Because we had we have a CEO who really is into new stuff, and he really supports us going forward. And he was also our chief innovations officer before. So before we started the company, we started as the innovations department of the Austrian state printing house. And that was all driven by our CEO. So we were able to convince him fairly easy that this is the stuff we have to do, and this is the way we have to go forward to really make this happen.
But that meant hiring lots of people, right? That meant changing the structure of the company.
Yeah, and that is why in the end we decided, okay, we have to split up into a new company, because we also saw that this doesn't work in the structure of the old company. So we had to break up and do something new. So
did you have a real perception that they realized there was stuff that they can't do? Many companies, I worked for a company that was 100 years old, and they were almost paralyzed by this bias that they thought that the management knew best.
I think there is this bias that the management always thinks they know what they do, but I like to go by a quote that I heard once: is we do not hire smart people to tell them what they should do. We hire smart people that they tell us how we should work.
Sounds good. I like it. Let's carry on with questions. Is it a good idea to break a build?
Yes.
Okay.
It is a good idea.
Even if you can detect vulnerabilities without library change? That means nothing to me.
I have to understand. Yes, I think it is still a good idea to break the build, because you have to, if you're doing something like continuous deployment or at least continuous integration, you have to be sure that the artifact that is coming out of your development pipeline is really deployable to your customer and to a production system. And even if there are any known vulnerabilities at this time, you have to stop the build and fix that.
It seemed to me that the things you said earlier about when a breach is detected, when it's accepted, when it's released, and when it's fixed, etc., but people were still using it. It seemed to me there were two questions there of trust and of communication. So people were still trusting the broken system. Is that kind of lethargy because they didn't want to change?
I think they didn't know. I think the problem is
communication.
It's communication, and it's the stuff that they didn't know which version they were using at the moment of the breach, and they are still not knowing which version they are using. So that is something about transparency and the visualization I was talking about. You have to really know what you're doing.
The last question, I can answer that. So the cheap answer is yes, but how do you not do that?
So if you're a big company and to not get slower.
Yeah, is it what do you call it? It's not outsourcing what you did, but you phased out your company, didn't you?
Yeah. So that is one thing you can do, but I think also in big companies you can, if the management supports this, and I think that is still true, and that is still important that your management is behind all this. You do the change from bottom up. So if you have a project, you start a new project as a project manager or as just a bunch of developers in a big company, try to implement the stuff. Try to show the management, okay, this is really working. This is something we can do, and this, and we should try those new things out.
I remember Seth Godin, my marketing guru, said always that everybody works for marketing, because if you're a developer, you have to market your solution to the next people up in the chain. So you always have to remember the communication and the persuasion part of what you do. Otherwise, you can create fantastic code and systems, but if it doesn't permeate the whole company, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that was very, very intriguing, very interesting, a nice insight to a 200-year-old company. You're not. You're a 1-year-old company.
Yeah, we're only a few-year-old company.
He's running a 200-year-old company like a startup. So I think, thank you very much. That was very, very insightful.
Thank you very much.
Stefan. Thank you. Well done.